Welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on watch your assumptions. Watch your assumptions. I really think that if you look at your life, if you go back a year, 2, 3, 5 years, that a large part of the decisions you've made are based on assumptions. One of my biggest struggles personally, I'll let you in on a little secret, a little tiny secret about me, is I assume too much. When people don't interact or they don't respond or they do certain things, I assume certain things most of the time, which much of the time is not based in fact at all. So that's kind of what the foundation of this episode is really all about. Again, watch your assumptions. Most of the time, what we hear and see really in our own minds are filled in by our own life's situations. As an example, how many times haven't you gone through stuff in your life? And as you go through the stuff in your life, you're reminded of what has happened in the past, which triggers an emotional response or a mental response based on what you're going through at that moment. Because you assume certain things are going to happen as a result of your history, so you assume that your history is going to repeat itself in what you're going through right now, when that is not always fair to the person or persons that are in your life at that time. Somebody said, by the name of Lemony Snicket, said, making assumptions simply means believing things are a certain way with little or no evidence that shows you are correct. Let me share it again. Making assumptions simply means believing things are a certain way with little or no evidence that shows you are correct. I'm going through a time in my life personally right now that I'm looking back at my assumptions and why I believed those assumptions were true. Let me share an example with you. There's an ancient story about a teacher and some of his students, and I'm going to loosely share this story in a paraphrase. It's not going to be exactly the story, but pretty darn close. So the teacher, his job at that moment, he was teaching a lot of people, and he was a traveling teacher. And a large group of people followed the teacher and the teacher's main leaders with him far away from their homes because he was teaching so much cool stuff they just wanted to listen to every word he had to teach. So they had been with this teacher all day long, and the evening came and some of the closer students to the teacher said, you know, the crowd's getting pretty hungry. We need to send them home. So the teacher said, well, what do we have to give them to eat? And so one of the students, the closest student to him, or one of them, came to him and said, well, we only have a couple items of food. That's not going to be enough to feed all these people. You know, he said, that's not even possible. So to make a very long story shorter, they were able to feed a large number of people by doing some things that leveraged the food that they had on hand. I think the bigger picture in that story for this episode here is that you shouldn't devalue the little that you have on hand to think that maybe because you have a little bit doesn't mean that you can do a lot with it. How many times haven't you heard people or heard stories of people who have bought stock in either Apple or Microsoft or pick any other business when the stock was relatively new and cheap? And 10, 20, 30 years later, they're now millionaires or billionaires because they saw the potential in that investment a long time ago. The flip side of that coin is true too. Some people have bought stock, they've bought investments in certain things, and they saw the market tanking, they panicked, they got out of it, and didn't realize that there are peaks and valleys with stocks. No, I'm not a stockholder. I own stock, but I'm not here to tell you how to do stock. What I am sharing with you is that there are hills and valleys in everything that you're going through in life. So if you don't have a long approach to what's going on, then those valleys can discourage you substantially. So this group of people had put their faith and confidence in this teacher. And this teacher, according to the story, didn't let them down because, again, he leveraged the little bit and made it much. Philip Houston shares, advances are made by answering questions, and discoveries are made by questioning answers. Let me say it again. In fact, let me say it 2 more times. By Philip Houston. Advances are made by answering questions. Discoveries are made by questioning answers. Again, advances are made by answering questions. Discoveries are made by questioning answers. How many times haven't you gone for years assuming things that were not true at all? I used to work in an insurance office back in the 90s, and we had transferred from one office to another office, and there was a different clerical staff in that office. So I would go to that office first day, second day, third day, fifth day, and walking into the office for the first day, I just assumed this individual by the name of Cheryl that was behind the desk was very aggressive, very abrupt, very impolite, very nasty, very short, just based on what she looked like. Not based on anything she said, not based on anything she did, just based on what she looked like. It didn't take me very long at all to realize that my assumption was completely wrong, and I was judging her in a way that was horrible. She is and was the most sincere, kindest individual that I had met up until that time in a very, very long time. But why would I assume the negative about her just based on her appearance? I'm telling you right now that your assumptions can get you in deep weeds. There's story after story. A guy named Miguel Ruiz writes, if others tell us something, we make assumptions. And if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and to replace the need to communicate. He says, even if we hear something and don't understand, we make assumptions about what it means and then believe the assumptions. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. We don't have the courage to ask questions. I know this is simple for most of us, but asking questions overcomes assumptions. I still, to this day, struggle with this concept. I still assume too much instead of asking questions. I wonder how many relationships that you've burned through because you've assumed too much about the people in your life. You've assumed negative things about them when in fact there wasn't anything negative about them at all. You just assumed, so you walked away. You saw their actions, that you saw certain things they did that you assumed were for a reason that was not good, and then you judged them based on what they did, when in fact what they did was to preserve themselves and or to save somebody else. Again, your assumptions can get you into big trouble. Lori Meyer shares, don't build roadblocks out of assumptions. Don't build roadblocks out of assumptions. We build roadblocks all the time. There's an ancient story about this prostitute, actually. Her name was Rahab. And Rahab lived in this walled city several thousand years ago. And of course, as a prostitute, you have a reputation. Well, one day, there was a couple of guys that came into town who were spies for an invading army, a potential invading army. So the last place that these spies would be, or should be, was in the house of a prostitute. Because the connotation goes, if you're in the house of a prostitute, you're there to do business, right? You're there to exchange services for money. Let me put it that way. So they go to this prostitute's house. So eventually some people in the city that was eventually going to be overtaken by the invading army found out that there were spies in the city. So they sent the important people of that city to the prostitute's house and said, you know, what's up? You know, we saw these people in your area, in your zip code, in your neighborhood. You know, certainly you have seen them. So when Rahab found out that the spies were being hunted, she decided to hide them in a place that the military people of that city wouldn't even think about looking. So eventually the military people came looking for the spies, and she lied to them and said, well, they went out the city and they're several miles away by now. So they ran on a wild goose chase looking for these guys when in fact Rahab the prostitute saved their lives. So if you think about that story and fast forward several thousand years to right now, right here and right now, how many times haven't you looked at people in the position they have? Yeah, prostitute's an extreme example, I get that. But the positions that they have, and you assume certain things about them that may not be based in fact. Again, assumptions many times, certainly not all the time, but many times they are not based in fact. Most of the time we hear and see something, and then we, like I said in the beginning, we fill in the blanks and make up these details that really are not very accurate at all. Let me share a story that I read a few years ago. John was told that a twin-engine plane would be waiting at the airport. Arriving at the airport, he spotted a plane warming up outside the hangar. He jumped in and said, "Let's go." The pilot taxied and took off. Once in the air, John told the pilot, "Fly low over the valley so I can take pictures of the fire over there on the hill." The pilot said, "Why?" John said, "Because I'm the photographer, CNN. I need to get some close-up shots." The pilot was strangely silent for a moment. Then he stammered, "So what you're telling me is you're not my flying instructor?" The point of the story is always ask, never assume. I know you've been in situations, I know I've been in situations more times than I'll share here today on the show, where your assumption is being judged by other people that don't know you worth atom. How many times haven't people walked up to you or assumed or posted or emailed or texted or messaged you or something or tweeted something that is really based in fiction, that they don't know you at all because they've assumed certain things about you that are not even accurate at all? T.K. Coleman writes, "Positive assumptions are needed only when you have negative assumptions that you're trying to overcome. But when you drop your assumptions altogether, your soul stands naked in the open fields of possibility, and what you choose to create from that space is up to you." I think assumptions and fear go hand in hand. I think assumptions and intimidation goes hand in hand. I think assumptions and doubt go hand in hand. I think assumptions and courage go hand in hand. Because if you assume that the universe is out to help you, then you're going to behave in a way that's different from somebody that assumes that the universe is out to get you or to trip you up or to help you fall flat on your face. You assume too much. There's another ancient story about a group of generals that were ordered to go out and check out this particular area that this army wanted to invade. So they sent out 10 or 12 guys out to this area, and they were gone for about a month and a half. So it wasn't just an overnight trip. So they were out for a month and a half. They're checking out all the territory. They went out for miles and miles for, again, about 40 days. So they're out checking the place out. They come back, and 8 out of the 10, 80% of the guys, 8 out of 12, 10 out of 12, were like all negative and said, "Man, there is no way that we can overtake this huge place because of this reason and that reason, and their military guys are huge and they're well armored and this and that." But then 2 of the guys, they came back and said, "Dudes," my paraphrase, he says, "Dudes, this is going to be a relative cakewalk. This is going to be not too difficult because they have all this stuff, and we have all this stuff. We have all we need to overtake and to do what we need to do." So the mistake that happened was when they were reporting back to the head guy that was considering taking over this area, what they did was they had a meeting with the crowd. Here's the point I'm trying to get to in this story. The generals that were sent away for 40 days to map out the place and check it out and see if they could take it down, they had the meeting not only with the top leader, but also the rest of the crowd. Not just the 10, 12 guys and the leader, but everybody else in the community. So the community heard the negative, so they assumed the negative and blew up the negative. They blew up all what could happen that could be terrible and ignored the report of the couple guys and said, man, this is going to be not a big deal. We can do this. They ignored that. Now, I think that math applies to your life and my life. 80%, maybe 90% of the people in your life are not going to understand your passion. They're not going to understand your priorities. They're not going to understand why you get up earlier than most people. They're not going to understand that your passion is so deep and so wide and so vast that they're going to assume things about you that are horrible. They're going to say some things about you that you just either shake your head or you will have the temptation to want to fight back and to attack them. I've done it, been there, done that, where you attack back at their false allegations, when in fact, you and I shouldn't even be reading or listening to the assumptions, the wrong assumptions, and the false allegations of other people. So eventually, this army, they did in fact take the advice of the two versus the majority, and they went and did some really extraordinary things. What I'm asking you to do is that if you look at opportunities as opportunities to be great, instead of looking at opportunities as something to be feared, then you're really going to be able to overcome and do some extraordinary things in your life that you haven't been able to do because you've allowed the assumptions of your past, hear me, you've allowed the assumptions of your past and the opinions of the 80 to 90% to cloud your potential to see what you can, in fact, potentially do in your own life. Assumptions, most of the time, are not based in facts. Again, assumptions are most of the time not based in facts. So when they're not based in facts, then you're going to find that more times than not, you're going to miss out on opportunities that are substantial because you've based your assumptions on things that are not true. Think about that a minute. Think about your own life for just a minute, half a minute. How many times haven't you based your assumptions on things that over time you have found out that are not true? And now you've wasted months, you've wasted years, or you've wasted decades as a result of believing something that was not true. Harold Kellock writes, on one of his European tours, the master magician and locksmith Harry Houdini found himself locked in by his own thinking. After he had been searched and put into a Scottish town jail, the old turnkey shut him in a cell and walked away. Houdini quickly freed himself from his shackles and then tackled the cell lock. But despite all his efforts, the lock would not open. Finally, ever more desperate but completely exhausted, he leaned against the door and it swung open so unexpectedly that he nearly fell headlong into the corridor. The jailer had not locked the door. I wonder how many times you have lived your life thinking that somebody else locked the door in your own life, that you cannot achieve certain extraordinary things that you have a passion to achieve because you've been afraid or you've been intimidated or you've allowed the assumptions of other people to cloud what your potential could be. There's been so many stories over the decades of people that have believed the lies of other people who did not have their best interest at heart at all. They believed their lies, and they believed that over a period of time that those lies and those assumptions became so ingrained into their psyche that they couldn't see past the negative opinions of other people. And I think you might be there in your own life from time to time, that you look back at your own life and you realize maybe There are people in your life in the past that haven't had your best interest at heart, and then that's literally shackled you from doing some extraordinary things that you wanted to do decades ago, but you didn't even attempt it enough times because of this negative opinions of other people. Susan Cooper shares an interesting story. Our perceptions or assumptions can be a great help, or a hindrance, or a conundrum. I have a friend who calls perceptions snapshots. He says a picture of, if you will, of something that sticks with us that we hold on to, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Sometimes if we don't take the time to look a little deeper, we can develop a very mistaken point of view. A few years back, my husband and I were out to dinner with another couple, friends of ours. My husband's friend was the head of animal control for a very large county and always had some interesting stories to tell. This night, the couple happened to be a bit late. When they arrived, they were both laughing and said, "Boy, do I have a story for you." Our friend had employees who were friends with a couple who owned a dog. The couple's dog liked to jump the fence of the neighbor next door and try to play with the neighbor's big white pet rabbit, who was often in the neighbor's backyard. The dog never hurt the rabbit. He just wanted to play. You see, so the couple's dog would race around and just wag his tail at the rabbit. Even still, this was obviously a problem for both couples, but somehow they were able to coexist. The two couples and neighbors never really got to know each other except for the occasional fence jumping and separating up of the two pets. This went on for a few years. The couple with the dog had come home late one night and let the dog out to play in the backyard. They were tired and paid little attention to their dog's activities when they heard the dog frantically barking and growling and went to see what was going on. And their dog's mouth was the white rabbit. The rabbit wasn't moving. He was really dirty and the rough for wear and tear. They were horrified and panicked. "Oh my goodness, our dog has killed our neighbor's pet rabbit." The couple removed the rabbit from their dog's mouth and put it in a box and just stared at it. Their dog just whimpered and was acting very strangely. The couple asked, "What do we do?" They talked for a long time and were wringing their hands and feeling terrible about the rabbit. The big question was what they were going to tell the neighbors. In the meantime, they had noticed that their neighbors weren't home, and it appeared that they hadn't been when their dog had jumped the fence. The couple came up with an idea. They talked about it for a minute, deciding what they would do. The couple washed the rabbit, blew-dried the fur, combed it and fluffed it up to make it look like it was still alive. It was a masterpiece. So leaving their dog in the house, they sneaked over to the absent neighbor's backyard and carefully placed a cleaned up, fluffed up rabbit in a place he would usually play. Then they sneaked back to their house and waited for what must seem like a really long time. Then they heard the other neighbors arrived and they listened. Nothing happened. So they went about their evening but kept an ear out for any noise just in case they heard something. Then it happened. The woman neighbor started screaming. She was obviously very distraught. Duh. The couple stared at each other and decided they needed to go ask whatever was wrong. Leaving their nervous and agitated dog in the house, they went out to the adjoining fence and peered over. They saw the neighbors staring at the fluffed up dead rabbit. Their neighbors were frozen in place, not moving towards their pet. They were just staring at it. Then the couple asked in the most casual voice they could muster, "What's wrong?" The woman's neighbors stared at them for just a bit, and they looked at each other, and then they looked at the dead rabbit and asked, "What do you mean?" The neighbor explained, "What we meant was our rabbit passed away yesterday, and we buried him near his favorite spot. And when we came home, there he was. He was all fluffy and white and clean." All the couple with a dog could say was, "Oh." The neighbor's husband husband, and then he moved toward the deceased dead rabbit, and he realized that he had royally messed up. He assumed too much. I wonder how many times you and I assume too much without having all the facts. I'm asking you today, as I end the show, to look at your assumptions. Make a list of them. I assume this and this and this and this and this. And then start doing your homework and see if these assumptions, in fact, are based in fact. And if they're not based in fact, then it's time to throw away those assumptions. I hope an idea or a story in this episode gave you a little information that can help you grow and learn and evolve and reach the goals that you have in your own life. My name is John Carver. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.